Well, it's that time again, and thank you for all your brilliant comments. He's not wearing a cap tonight. I don't wear those caps very often. I look a bit silly in a baseball cap. I probably look silly in one of these as well, but as Dan's not wearing one, I'm wearing one. It's show, I can't even do it. I need so many fingers. It's show 18, and thank you for all your nice comments about how much you're enjoying Dan and I during the lockdown. Dan, how are you?
Put the hat back on. You gotta put the hat back on, dude.
All right, I'll put the hat back on. All right.
I think you look pretty good in the hat.
All right, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, sir. I'm good.
The beard's growing though. You've got the big shag coming on.
Yeah, I gotta shave a little bit. I think this weekend coming up, I'll get a haircut. My wife will give me a haircut. She's good at that, so we'll take care of business.
So it's that time. It's nearly dinner time where you are. So what's for dinner? Come on.
Not sure yet. My wife and son are out. My son is doing some ice skating this afternoon, and so when they're done, I'll talk to her on the phone, and we'll figure out what the plan is for dinner.
Let's start today, Dan, with some news. I mean, you've spoken to Bob Arum recently. Literally in the last hour. It's the anniversary of the very sad death, Pernell Whitaker, a year ago. I mean, he was born a year before me, so he was taken really early by that road traffic accident when he was a pedestrian, of course. But give us the news first of all. We're going to talk about a lot of things tonight.
Sure.
We're going to talk about Larry Holmes saying that Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury wouldn't have been able to live in his era of the golden age of heavyweights. That's a fantastic topic. We'll talk about how good Pernell was. I spoke to a guy who's overseen his company, the CEO of a company, who Avi Lasarov, who is they've overseen test cricket going on here. That's England and the West Indies, as we call it, the Caribbean cricketers who are here on tour at the moment. They just had a first test. They beat England. They did all the testing with no crowd in a big stadium in the south of England. But they also did the Queensbury event last week that went off without a hitch. We could have a quick chat about that. We haven't mentioned that. The big heavyweight, David Adelaide, looks good fun. And he's around some great characters. But there's some news, isn't there? American news right now.
First of all, before we get to that, I don't get the whole cricket thing. When I was in the UK for the Carl Froch Lucha Mbute fight, I remember hanging at one of the bars in the hotel with one of my colleagues from Epix Television, and there was a cricket game on the television, and the bartender was watching it and serving drinks. And so we were talking to the bartender, and he started to explain it. I was like, look, we're Americans. We don't really quite get the whole cricket thing. And when he told me that a game might last up to like a few days, it kind of lost me right there. So, well,
sometimes, Dan, England and Australia and England and other teams play 25 days of cricket over the summer, and it still ends in a draw. And the team that wins it retains. The team that wins it retains a wooden urn called the Ashes, about that big. That's the trophy. It's a little wooden trophy about that big.
Cricket chat or boxing chat?
I'm happy to talk cricket because it's probably my favorite sport.
All right, well, I'll hit you with some of the boxing news. So as you mentioned, I talked to Bob. Now, the people should know that Tuesday night was supposed to be a world title defense from 130-pound world champion Jamel Herring, who was supposed to defend his title for the second time, taking on Jonathan Akendo. It was a fight that had been originally scheduled for earlier in July, was postponed until Tuesday night because Jamel had tested positive for COVID-19. He actually wasn't one of these people that got it and was asymptomatic. He actually was ill, not to the extent where he had to obviously be hospitalized or anything like that, but it still took a lot out of him, and he was down for a little bit, but he was determined to fight the fight. He felt like he was back to about 90%. His weight was good. He had tested negative in Omaha, Nebraska before he came to Vegas just a few days ago. And when he got to Vegas, like everybody that enters the bubble, he got the test. He went up to his room, isolated as he's supposed to do, went to sleep. And when he woke up the next morning, which was Monday morning, he was positive again. They're not sure if it's
weird. Just so weird, isn't it?
Previous case. The bottom line is he tested positive, and so his fight was canceled against. So they elevate the undercard co-feature between Michaela Mayer and Helen Joseph, a women's 130-pound fight, which also had been postponed because Mayer had a positive COVID test, which they think was a false positive. But nonetheless, this was like supposed to be the card of the positive COVID cases back in action. But anyway, so Jamel is off the show. But what Bob told me is that as long as he's cleared, which they don't think there'll be any problem in doing so, that they will reschedule the fight between Jamel and Akendo sometime in August, where Top Rank is doing shows once a week. So they're going to have a busy calendar in August, at least, with a Herring rescheduled fight, along with the rescheduled Storm Alvarez-Joe Smith fight because of Alvarez's injury, as well as some other fights that during that month. And then, of course, if Jamel is successful and Carl Frampton, who's supposed to fight on a ESPN show in August, on August 15th, on a double bill with Michael Conlan in Belfast, the idea is, of course, that Herring and Frampton will square off for Jamel's title in the fall. But obviously, Jamel's got to get over the COVID case. He's got to get back in the ring, got to retain the title. But he will be rescheduling that fight for August. I thought that was interesting news from Bob.
Well, the other thing is, of course, he's so unlucky because, and this is one of the peculiarities of this virus. I mean, imagine us traveling all the way to Vegas and suddenly testing positive, and we go home and we quarantine, and we're just journalists. You know, we're just there loving the sport. We have to go home. We come back again the second time, and we test positive again. We got to go home again. It's unbelievable.
It's just terrible for everybody because not only
must be so demoralizing, Dan.
He's been through 2 training camps. Oquendo has been through 2 training camps. And their teams have put in the time and effort. Everything is on schedule. Everybody is healthy. They're on weight, and he tests positive. He, in this case, the first time he was sick, he actually had symptoms and had to take care of that. My understanding is that in terms of this time, he doesn't have any symptoms. He feels fine. He has said he was only back to about 90% from when he had it previously, but still 90% good enough to go through with the fight. And, unfortunately the fight is off, but hopefully everything will work out and they can still get the fight done in August. And again, if he's the winner, he can go forward with a much, much bigger fight against Frampton in the fall. And hopefully him and Oquendo can make their money and put on a good fight. And, we left Top Rank in a tough spot because their card, obviously it's always terrible to lose the main event, but when you lose the main event and you're down to just 4 fights, none of which are earth-shaking, makes it difficult. But if there's a silver lining, it gives Michaela Mayer and Helen Joseph, these women an opportunity to really put themselves out there in the main event and try to make some fans and put on a good fight. It's the first time ever in the history of Top Rank that a women's fight is going to headline a card. So
that's interesting
perspective. And I haven't been able to get the exact time to figure out the exact one, but I believe based on my cursory research that it's the first time that there'll be a female main event on ESPN since probably at least around 2013. I think back then, Holly Holm, before she went over to do UFC fights, I believe she main evented in a Friday Night Fights show that was largely made up of women's boxing matches. There, at the very least, there was, Layla Ali headlined on ESPN on a Friday Night Fights card, back in the mid 2000s. But the point is, it's rare. It doesn't happen often, and so it's a great opportunity for these women.
But it is a sign that women's boxing, obviously this is because of a cancellation, but it is a sign that women's boxing's on the rise. And I think people, we haven't spoken since it was announced, but I think people are more excited about the Katie Taylor-Delphine Passoon fight over here, which is a really good matchup to have that rematch because, I had Passoon winning that fight against Katie Taylor by a round.
So did I. We were both at that
last year.
I had her winning also, very close.
Yeah, on that dramatic night when Anthony Joshua lost to Andy Ruiz, of course, we were all there. It was kind of overshadowed in the end.
Right.
It was always a sidebar story afterwards. But
listen, that Pursoon fight with Katie, the fight that was on that Joshua Ruiz undercard, it might be one of the best, if not the best, women's fight I've ever seen, just in terms of the pure action. I've seen some other, good women's fights also, but in terms of the stakes that were there, they were unifying. For the winner to become the undisputed lightweight champion, the venue it was in being in Madison Square Garden on that caliber of a card with the heavyweight world championship at stake, all that together, and then they put on that kind of spectacular show. That was a great fight. Now, of course, I was very much interested to see Katie against Amanda Serrano, who's one of the most outstanding women boxers in the world. But if that fell apart and the backup plan happens to be a rematch with Pursoon, I'm down for that. That'll be a good fight.
No, it will. Couple of champions in America have vacated, haven't they? Including Shaka Stevenson.
Yeah, Shakur Stevenson and Emmanuel Navarrete. Now, Shakur was the WBO champion at featherweight. Navarrete was the WBO's champion at junior featherweight. And neither one of these moves, frankly, Gareth, comes as a big surprise. Shakur has been talking about ever since he first won that title, vacant title against Joaquin Gonzalez in a brilliant one-sided performance where he basically shut him out over 12 rounds, has been talking about since that time of a very limited shelf life at 126. He's 23 years old now, just turned 23, starting to, feel the pain of making 126 pounds, was willing to do it if he could get, that one big fight. He really wanted the Josh Warrington fight. We've talked about that. He was willing to go to the UK to fight him on his home turf. They had an offer. It was, according to the Shakur side, less money than he would have gotten to stay in New York, which is, adjacent to his hometown of Newark, and to fight on Miguel Mariaga in a fight that would be perceived as a much, much easier type of fight. And they just did not feel like Eddie Hearn made it worth their while to make this fight in England, even though he was more than willing. And I don't think he would have, frankly, taken that much more to get him to go there. It didn't happen. Now, then you start hearing about Warrington looking to pursue a fight with the Chinese regular champion of the WBA, Zhu Can. And, Shakur was sort of like, well, if I can't get that big fight, forget about it. They didn't reschedule the Mariaga fight. So he took the non-title fight that opened up the top-ranked series of these fights in the bubble, scored a knockout against just a regular opponent. And after that, made the decision, look, there's no big fight for me at featherweight. We can't make the Warrington deal at this point. They're just not willing to pay, what they feel is the appropriate amount of money to get him to go over there. And so, you know what, forget about it. I'm coming to 130. And because of the rules in the WBO, he was able to petition to become the #1 contender, which is part of the rules. If you're a champion in the smaller weight class and you step up to the bigger weight class, they'll make you the #1 contender. So he'll be the #1 challenger at 130 pounds.
Is that Berchelt, Miguel Berchelt?
It's Berchelt, correct? Yeah, I don't put in the next fight. They're both with Top Rank, so they'll
great fight, Dan. That's a great fight.
But I don't think that's going to happen because Berchelt is in line this fall to fight Oscar Valdez,
right?
The WBO's featherweight title not that long ago, before Shakur won it. Valdez, Top Rank just finalized, it's kind of everybody's sort of known about it, but they made it official today, which is we're taping this on Tuesday, that he would fight July 21st against Jason Velez, a former world title challenger. It should be a good action fight. If he wins Valdez, then the Berchelt fight will take place coming up this fall. Berchelt, is coming off a win in Mexico that was one of the ESPN shows from a couple of weeks ago. So they've got that in place. And with Navarrete, again, vacating.
That's another great fight, though, by the way, with Valdez.
No doubt.
That's a terrific fight. I'm a huge fan of Oscar Valdez because I watched him live in the rain. I was doing radio commentary in the rain in that tennis court in Los Angeles.
Yep.
We did talk sport that night under a canopy when he fought Scott Quigg. It was a terrific fight.
It was a great fight, and I was there. I came from Virginia to California to cover that fight, but because the rain was so intense, which is highly unusual for Southern California, particularly that time of year anyway.
It was a monsoon of rain, wasn't it? It was unbelievable, wasn't it?
And Michaela Mayer, who we just talked about, she was on undercard, also scored like a first-round knockout. But here's the thing, though. There was, all the journalists that were there to cover the fight, you could not really set your laptop up at ringside. The rain was so horrendous and the wind and everything, you wouldn't have a machine.
No, honestly, we had a plastic tarpaulin. The technician kept having to mop everything up. We were coming live to talk sport. Myself, I got Raimundo Beltran with about 5 minutes notice to come and do co-coms with my colleague Don McGuinness. And I was talking between rounds. We just somehow made it happen with all these towels mopping it all up while we were doing it. Because it was a tennis court. It was open air as well. Yeah. So it was
it's a great arena. It's a very famous arena for tag fights, and they delivered, but we just couldn't be ringside. So while you were ringside under the tarp doing the radio, myself and the other reporters, they basically set up a table with some big TVs in the what serves as also the interview room for the post-fight press conferences.
Yeah.
We tables and we watched on the big screen, and it was basically like writing from the the media center at one of the bigger fights, or like I've done watching TV right from TV from my living room. So as my wife said to me, she said, "So you traveled 3,000 miles and you watched from a conference room in the basement of an arena?" I was like, "Yeah, what are you going to do? There was no other option." So finish up the. Because
that arena, when the sun goes down, the first fights, it's still very warm, isn't it? And as the night goes on, it gets darker there. And it's beautiful for about 2 hours in the sunshine there, isn't it? And then the lights come on. It's an amazing venue, isn't it?
It might sound blasphemous to some boxing fans who've been there for fights. They call it the war grounds. A lot of people, because it has been the home. There's so many phenomenal action fights. Valdez Quig being one of them. Certainly, Vasquez and Marquez fought there. You had the Timothy Bradley Provodnikov fight there. John Molina was in a great fight there with Lucas Matisse. There's been a string of great fights.
I think Jorge Darce has fought there a couple of times, hasn't he?
I'm not sure about that, but here's the thing. I personally don't love going to do fights there because of the thing you just said. You get there, it's 100 degrees, you're dying of the heat, you can't
see a laptop screen.
You can't see it. You're just absolutely, dying in the heat. And then that sun dips down below the mountains.
And it's dark.
You're freezing to death because it goes down to like 30 degrees.
Yeah.
One time I covered one of the great fights that was there. The first match between Brandon Rios and Mike Alvarado, which was on.
Oh, yeah, that was a great fight.
Bonito Donaire fight.
Yeah.
Forgot to bring my jacket. I was sitting at ringside with my hands. I'm picking this up. I had like my hands underneath my laptop for heat. It was cold, so I could type my story. So, it's a great location that fans love because it produces these great fights. But from the point of view of as a journalist having to work there, not a huge fan of it. It's kind of hard to get to, but whatever. I've been to.
I'll just never forget the rain because it was so peculiar. Yeah. Even when I look back on the photos and we're covered over and we're doing this out of our little canopy, so mad.
Just to finish up on the last point though just to finish up on Navarrete, he'll do the same thing that is being done in the featherweight division with with Shakur seeking the number one spot at 130. He's also a BBO guy that's going up to 126. So they're going to give him the number one position in the featherweight division, and he'll be in line to fight for, I guess, what will be Shakur's vacant title whenever after that. So they're making moves, and this is largely caused because of this pandemic, because guys couldn't get the title fights they wanted during the time off, and so now they're on to bigger weight classes, and so that's what's going on. They're both vacated, and we'll see what happens with their futures in the new weight classes.
Well, a little wrap from me about the return of boxing after an absence of 118 days last Friday in the BT Sports Studios. 65 people in there in all, in the boxing bubble for Frank Warren's Queensberry Promotions return. Brad Foster looked fantastic, retained his British and Commonwealth super bantamweight titles. I thought he's an ex-kickboxer. He's like 14-0 now. He's had a couple of draws, I think, but it was a terrific little scrap. But I like the look of the heavyweight, David Adelaide. He's got a long way to go. He's only 2-0 after that, or 3-0 or whatever. But he's a great character. And when you've got great characters at heavyweight, great personalities, they tend, because they're big men. In fact, they were talking about, was he big enough? He's 6'3" and 220 pounds, for God's sake. And then they were asking him afterwards, are you big enough? Like, he's big enough, and he's got a big enough personality. And so the card, it was rather like, it was slightly better than Top Rank's first card back on June the 9th. I think it was now, looking back. A couple of up-and-comers. Chamberlain's a very good, promising prospect. I mean, it had some prospects on. It was a little bit one-sided. Brad Foster made the main event one-sided because he was so good. But it went off without a positive test. The bubble worked. The system worked. It's still very peculiar. It's not boxing as I know it or you know it. And I do.
What was interesting is that, and I think this is accurate, that Frank Warren, the promoter of the event, was not even allowed to go because
he chose not to go.
Well, I guess he was deemed as sort of like non-essential personnel.
No, he deemed himself, Dan, because I spoke to him the day before, and it was the headline in my Telegraph piece. He said, "I don't want my ego to get in the way. I'm not essential as one of the 65 people there. We're going to have a camera on me at home,
right, in his house.
I'll just do it from home." In the event, he wasn't well actually on the night because he was due to come on. I did a radio show immediately after the boxing show for 3 hours on Talk Sport because it was the comeback, and the UFC had a big event at the weekend. We spoke about Jorge Masvidal, remember? He didn't win against...
We got our picks right?
We got our picks right, yeah.
That's what counts.
Kamaru Usman ground it out as we predicted, yeah. But Frank was quite patently clear about the fact he didn't want his ego to get in the way.
It's just good that they're able to find a way to bring it back because, in terms of the bigger promoters, really, it had only been Top Rank that had done any business. There's been a couple of smaller cards around the world and in other places, but mainly it's been that from the TV point of view, it's been Top Rank in this country. Nothing had come back yet in the UK. Frank's got it off the ground. They have a series of about 4 or 5 shows for the summer. You know, in the next couple of weeks, we'll see Eddie Hearn back with their series in the UK. So slowly but surely, you know, end of July, we're supposed to have a Golden Boy show in California if they can get it off the ground because the cases have spiked there. But it's at least something more than just the Top Rank shows, multiple countries, multiple promoters. So, you know, slowly but surely, crawling before they can walk and run, but boxing is slowly coming back, thankfully.
Well, July the 10th to August the 29th, we've got 9 shows now. And our next show is July the 25th. And it's Joe Joyce against the German. I think it's Michael Wallish he's fighting. And it's good because Joe Joyce is going to have a fight. A couple of weeks later, Daniel Dubois is going to have a fight. And they're going to try and get those two together. And I think it's October the 24th. It's around that time.
Well, I mean, their fight was supposed to take place, but it was one of the many, many cards that was postponed because of the...
Hey, it was Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder this weekend in Vegas coming up. We'd be in Vegas right now.
Yeah. Well, now I guess that fight, at least according to Bob, at the earliest is going to be December the 19th. And I actually asked him about that. You know, they're hopeful to do it in America with some crowd. And but he made the point, look, if we can't have a crowd for different reasons, we're going to have to try to shop this overseas to a place either where they're putting up huge money to just bring the event there, or a place where the virus is more under control and they can actually have a crowd of some kind. So, but again,
that could be here, but it's more likely to be Saudi then, in my view.
No, Saudi could be. He talked about possibly, you know, someplace in Asia, someplace in Australia.
No, sorry, I don't want to go. I've had this. I don't want to go to Australia. I don't want to be in Australia for Christmas.
All I can say is, from now as we speak until the proposed timing of that fight in the middle to late part of December, there's a lot of things that are going to take place up and down through this whole thing where we don't really have to worry about that too strenuously for the next few months.
Well, you know, it's a bit like all those things, like what's fight week going to look like? You know, I normally go out 2 weeks before I go in. I'm not going to be able to go into Tyson Fury's mansion. Well,
no, it's a whole different ballgame, Gareth.
Having said that, let's see if the G-Man, Russell Crowe, gets into the Fury mansion. They might COVID test me on the door. Tyson might give me his own COVID test.
I think you'll get in there. That's my bet.
I might have to steal in there with a mask. And I might have to kind of like just sneak my way. Imagine trying to rob a house with all the Furies in it. Can you imagine?
No.
You're going to get a proper fucking beating, aren't you?
That is true. And it could come from any one of them. Oh,
man. What else is there? So that was fun. I'm glad Joe Joyce is next back because it just raises it a level in terms of interest. I spoke to, let me just get his name up so I get it right, because this guy is very interesting. Today, I spoke to Avi Lazarou, the CEO of a COVID testing. They're a genetics company. I spoke to him about the testing process that they created for BT Sport and Frank Warren and the Boxing Board of Control.
Let me ask you a question before you go further. Is that going to be the same group that's going to do the testing? My phone is ringing here. The same group that's going to be doing the testing for the matchroom events?
I don't know yet, actually. I need to find that out. I didn't ask him today, but I know that he's been doing the Test cricket. They've done some of the Premier League football here. So they're a big, big company. For example, they've got a contract to test all the restaurants in Hong Kong, for example, as well. You know,
wow,
all the stuff.
That's a pretty big. They're not just doing sports.
Company. No, I mean they've had major arguments and law cases with the American government. Yeah, they're a really, really big company, a really big genetics company. So what he was saying was that as it develops, as a COVID vaccine comes on board, in the new normal, as we're calling it, that people might need bio-passports to get into venues, because you'll be tested, your temperature and all those things, and you bring your bio-passport. You know, that's what all this track and trace is we've got in our country. If you go to eat in some restaurants want you to give your name, address, and all those things. So if someone tests positive there, you can be informed and they can advise you to quarantine or make you quarantine. Right. You know, it's a bit big brotherish. It's a bit Orwellian. I spoke to him about that. The interview will be out on YouTube in a couple of days. I'm writing a piece with the Telegraph about it. But I think as people come to terms with this, the bio passport may become very important, especially for people like us, traveling a lot, getting into venues. So the record of our quarantining and our negativity with COVID is very important for us to be inside.
It's going to be all journalists. It's not just those of us that cover boxing. I've been following some of my friends who cover basketball. So I've been friendly with Chris Mannix from Sports Illustrated and Mark Stein from the New York Times. And they're two, I mean, Chris obviously also covers boxing for Sports Illustrated, but they're very well-respected boxing journalists in this country. Basketball journalists in this country.
Yeah.
And, both of them are now in the bubble in Orlando, Florida, as they get ready for the restart of the NBA season. So they are not allowing that many media members into the Orlando bubble, but they're premier journalists in this country. They're there in the bubble. So I've been following along sort of, their experiences with that and the sorts of things that they have to do with, regular testing, regular temperature checks, figuring out what the oxidation is of their blood to make sure there's no issues. And they get these bands that can go beep if you're too close to somebody in terms of keeping your social distance. So the NBA, unlike boxing, which is fractured, that's a very high-powered, well-funded, extremely wealthy league. They're doing, it seems, at least on the surface, everything right to make sure that their athletes and their staff and the other people, the journalists and all the people associated with it, they're inside their bubble, which is hard to get into. They're not messing around. And off to a good start, and hopefully when the season restarts in the next couple of weeks, we'll see some good games, and and not just boxing back in action, but you're going to see basketball, and hopefully baseball will follow, and we'll see what else. I guess.
But the point is, Dan. But the point is, when promoters come out and say, when Bob Arum comes out and says we're going to get 15,000 people into the Raiders Stadium, you can't just get 15,000 people into the Raiders Stadium. That you can't just say, well, we'll let the people who come in take the risk of getting COVID with themselves in their groups or in their seats.
I'm just not sure how you enforce the distance.
Let me just finish. What the guy was saying was you might end up with people in bubbles, weirdly, of 100 people around the stadium in little bubbles. It's really complex what's going to happen. They're not going to just go, oh, well, the levels have dropped now. Everyone can just put a mask on and just come in. It ain't going to be like that. It's not going to be simple. There are predictions in this country that 120,000 people could die from COVID in the winter. Do you know what I mean? There are all kinds of weird scientific predictions at the moment. I mean, it's out of control in America. I see your vehemence about people not wearing masks, for example, and conglomerating.
Well, we've already had, you said 100, whatever the number you've said that could die in Britain. We are already in America surpassed 135,000 deaths. I think we're close to 140,000 deaths. And that's with cases that just are rising dramatically, whereas New York was the hot spot when this all started and it was absolutely terrible. It's being dwarfed by right now in terms of the cases that are in places like Florida, in Arizona. It's getting bad to the point. Look, in California, the governor of California, they're involved with the decision making, but they closed certain businesses again. School districts where you have to decide if you're going to send your child back to school in the new school year.
It's optional, isn't it?
Well, no, it depends on where you are. So many schools,
in some places, without getting into the schooling system, isn't it optional to want to send
some of them? Listen, I'll tell you, where I live in Virginia. Well, let me finish what I was saying. Los Angeles County, massive school district. They just closed their schools to do things online through the first part of their school year. I don't know the exact date. They did the same thing in San Diego County, which is just south of Los Angeles. They've done the same thing in Nashville, Tennessee, in Atlanta, Georgia, all big, major metropolitan school districts. Where I live in the Washington, D.C. suburbs, our school, we're dealing with this right now. They are planning. I don't think it's going to work. First of all, I already delayed the start of school from late August till after, I think it's like September 8th now. Secondly, they were asking the parents and families to decide, are you going to put your child in school 2 days a week with the rest of it being online, or are you going to do it all online? Now, talking to the people in our community, we think that they're going to ultimately start the school year where everybody is online like they've done with the neighboring school district. My wife and I are of the opinion that we would send our son not to school, but have him do it at home, because nobody knows how they're going to handle it. They don't have the money to test. You're expecting a school teacher to go into the classroom. She's there to teach, not to be a doctor or to make sure that 7-year-olds keep their social distance or that they have their mask on. It's just way too complicated right now. When they figure out some legit parameters, then maybe we would reconsider. But I don't think we're going to have to, because I think at the end of the day, no one is starting school in school buildings, at least not in our community, and certainly not in some of those big major metro areas like I just mentioned. I know also in New York City, school will start with, for the most part, online. It's a real wreck right now, what's happening.
Well,
So
the bottom line with all of this, for everyone watching this and anyone involved in whatever we do, is try and stay as safe and as contained as possible, and don't be silly about going into big crowds, because it could affect things you want to do at some point, because you may be carrying it then. Look, let's get back to the boxing. Poor old Pernell Whitaker died a year ago, very near where he was from. He was just crossing a road and he was run over. Sorry, I got my feet up on the sink here, but
you look awfully comfortable.
What's that?
You look awfully comfortable.
I am, but it is 11:30 at night, so I need to be.
Fair enough.
And I've just had a little tipple of tequila, if anyone was wondering. Just before I hit the sack after we do this. Hitting the sack in English, the Queen's English, means going to bed, by the way.
I got you.
So, we both knew him. We both knew him personally. He was a very modest person when I met him, and I was really surprised. Very
Penno was, he was one of these guys where whether it was in an interview or, after a fight or promoting a fight or even just in person, could really flaunt a very, very, very egotistical sort of attitude. I saw that, but I also saw the side of him where he was just a very chill, nice, laid back kind of guy. So he kind of ran both ways.
I've seen both.
Yeah, I've seen both also. Not, it depended on, I guess, his mood or what was going on.
I remember him having a haranguing match with Amir Khan when he was in Zab Judah's corner. The Mandalay Bay.
He was training. He had a little bit of.
And Amir had a bit of that. And who gave it back? Pernell Whitaker. It was brilliant.
The thing about Whitaker is, aside from being one of the all-time great fighters in the history of the sport, he won championships, in 4 different weight classes, from lightweight all the way up to, junior middleweight.
Yeah.
Look, I always thought about, as great as he was, pound for pound, without question, for a number of years at his peak, and he did a lot of that while on substance abuse, because he was a drug user. That's not even up for dispute. He admits that he was addicted to cocaine. Terrible drug user. The things that he accomplished with that as a part of his life, just imagine if he was clean, how much longer he may have.
Yeah, but he wouldn't have been Pernell Whitaker then, because
oh my gosh,
he found the greatest peace when he was in a ring or in a gym.
It was just
because he was ravaged sometimes when he wasn't in there, Dan.
He would embarrass guys, and to me, I get a lot of grief from boxing fans at times because I don't have a lot of patience for guys that are just cuties that don't come to fight. That constantly take the backward steps, even when they're in with an overmatched opponent, which has always been my criticism of certain fighters like Guillermo Rigondeaux or Arislani Lara. So they're brilliant tacticians, and I've never doubted or disputed their skills. But when they're in the ring with somebody that they totally overmatch, and everybody knows it, at that moment they don't take the initiative to try to, at least using their skills and not hanging their chin out there to dry, but to at least go for some type of crowd-pleasing moment, instead of just being content to fight backwards, off the back foot, throw a jab. That I can't stand. Whitaker,
you don't mind.
He could do all those defensive things that he do, but he would at least make it interesting because he would clown the guy and totally embarrass him, but he would also counter. He would also land some nice shots. And even though he didn't have huge punching power, he scored some very dramatic knockouts at moments when he needed them.
He was an artist then. He was an artist.
He could do everything. He wasn't blessed with big punching power, but again, in some of his big moments, trailing on the scorecards against Hurtado, a gigantic payday against De La Hoya, in a welterweight championship fight at stake with Oscar sitting ringside.
Very late in his career, though.
Having never scored a knockout that late in a fight, way behind, knocks Hurtado out, devastating fashion, by the way, to win that fight. When he became undisputed lightweight champion, to unify at the time the 3 major belts. He's not a guy that's known for first-round knockouts. He put Nazario. I watched the fight today against Nazario. Just
Really?
part of the memory. He knocked him, and it wasn't just like, the ref stopped the fight. It was one shot that the guy didn't see. He went down face first, and he was done in the first round. So, and that's a pretty big deal. When you become the undisputed champion by first-round knockout, when you're not known for your punching power, that's a big deal. And of course, the fight that probably his greatest performance in his entire career was when he played with Julio Cesar Chavez, and they ripped him off and gave Pernell a draw in a fight that he clearly was the winner. He was a brilliant, great fighter.
No, I completely agree. And as I say, my abiding memory is speaking to him there was almost a gentility about him around that Amir Khan fight. And then Amir came by. It was at the workouts, actually, when that ring at the Mandalay Bay, remember?
Yeah, I was there.
5-6 years ago, probably. And Amir Khan smacked down with a load of low blows. And I just remember Amir giving it a bit of that as he came past. And Pernell was on it straight away. Zab was standing there laughing. Pernell was just giving. I'm not even sure if Amir knew who it was, if I'm honest. I might have even said to him afterwards, you know, that was Pernell Whitaker you were having a slam with. He was like, was it?
The last time I saw Pernell Whitaker was I had gone to Turning Stone Casino in Verona, New York.
Yeah, I know it.
I went to cover the Dimitri Bivol title defense at light heavyweight against Joe Smith. And believe it or not, as it turns out, which I had no idea, Bivol, a Russian light heavyweight, his favorite fighter is Pernell Whitaker, an American, lightweight welterweight, which with a totally different kind of style than Bivol has. And Main Events, who was involved with Bivol, obviously they were the promoter for Pernell for the vast majority of his career. And still he had close relationships with people at Main Events who, try to help him in his post-boxing days. They would set him up with some meet and greets and, he would be around some of their events and whatever. And when they told him about Bivol being a fan of his, I guess Whitaker also was familiar with Bivol and liked his style. And so Pernell came up to Turning Stone to make some appearances during that weekend and also to watch, the Mutual Admiration Society for Bivol to have his favorite guy ringside and for him to get a chance to watch him. And he watched the fight. So the last time I had a chance to talk to Pernell was when that fight was over, which, was a pretty clear decision win for Bivol. At ringside, after the fight, Pernell came and sat with me for, 20 minutes. I interviewed him about it. And the column I ended up writing for Monday was basically the Pernell Whitaker assessment of the guy who idolized him on that night. And, Pernell was gracious with his time and was a good dude.
Great steal for a story, that one. Great one.
I mean, that was
so
it was easy to do.
Look, let me pose this at you, because this is what people will ask next time. In many ways, I see a line of accession, as you would to a throne, that I think Mayweather was before Pernell. I'm just talking about great defensive boxers who really showed their wares, who were amazing all-round boxers. Mayweather followed in succession in a way. Who do we rank as the greatest in our list of greatest above each other? Pernell above Floyd or Floyd above Pernell?
Well, as much as I respected Pernell Whitaker and as much of a fan of his as I was, and I was asked a question because I posted about the fact that today was the anniversary of Pernell's passing. People asked the obvious question: who wins, Pernell Whitaker or Floyd Mayweather? They both were, dominating fighters in roughly the same weight classes. They both won titles at 35, 40, 47, 54. For brief moments at 54. Who would win? And as much as I respect Pernell and think he's one of the all-time legends of the sport, I would pick Mayweather in that fight if they fought each other. And just in terms of their overall accomplishments, I have to give Mayweather the nod over Whitaker. He could do a little bit more. They were both great defensively. Pernell obviously probably a little bit better, but not by any dramatic way. But offensively, certainly Floyd gets the nod in that department. I just think Floyd probably accomplished a little bit more over the course of his career, had more big fights than Pernell did. But they're, it's almost unfair because they're both so brilliant at what they did that it's hard to really split that.
What you have to do with Floyd is kind of add in the overall package of his marketing genius. He didn't get the gold medal in the Olympics like Pernell did in Los Angeles. I can't remember what Floyd got in the World Championships, but Pernell got a silver. He lost to Angel Herrera in the World Championship. Amateur World Championship final.
I will say this, though, as it relates to the Olympic part of it. Floyd got the bronze in a fight where in the semifinals he was just ripped off. I mean, it's not on the Roy Jones being ripped off in South Korea level, but it was a horrendous decision. Floyd deserved to win that fight. I believe he would have won the gold medal. He didn't get it. It was a robbery. In the case of Pernell Whitaker, obviously he was a brilliant performer in the Olympics. He did win the gold medal. But and now I'm not saying he wouldn't have still won it, but the caveat to that is when Pernell fought in the 1984 Olympics, he cleaned up a whole bunch of gold medals. He didn't have to fight the Russians or the Cubans because they boycotted the Olympics that year. So took away a dramatic amount of talent from that group. And that was the Olympic team that produced, obviously, Pernell, but Evander Holyfield and Virgil Hill.
I'd forgotten that the Cubans and the Russians boycotted Los Angeles in '84 because of Moscow in 1980. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, of course.
Now, when Floyd fought in '96 in the Olympics, that Olympics, there were Russians and Cubans, and if I remember correctly, some of the Soviet Union, they had their own teams, like some of the. They
did.
So it made it even more difficult because more of those amateurs make those teams from those countries.
You just made me feel really old, Dan, because that was my first Olympics and Paralympics in Atlanta. My God.
The point, though, is we will definitely agree, whatever version of the medal that each of them received in the Olympic Games, Pernell Whitaker and Floyd Mayweather were on par with each other as brilliant amateur fighters and went on to become all-time great professional world champions.
I think Floyd wins on points in their prime, you know.
Yeah. You know, people were asking, like, well, okay, well, what weight would they fight at? I said it doesn't matter because they
probably lightweight.
I mean, you know, Mayweather had a very brief time at lightweight. He had a controversial win against Castillo. It was a more clear-cut decision in the second fight. He didn't stick around at lightweight for very long. He then went up to 140. Pernell, you know, had a fairly dominating run at lightweight where he fought a number of title fights, unified all three titles, was around for a bit longer. But in terms of, you know, they both had accomplishment. They both were, you know, 140 and at 147. The one edge also that I think that you and I have talked about previously, just the size of them as human beings. Floyd's got
slightly bigger, yeah.
Yeah, Floyd's a little bit of a bigger person, just physically.
Well, if you look at it, Floyd's greatest run is at 147. Really, he was brilliantly matched at 147 as well.
But he was probably better as an athlete, as a boxer,
at 40,
at 135.
Yeah.
But he didn't stay long at those two weights.
No, that's right.
35 and 40.
But the thing is with Floyd, they managed him very well to make the biggest fights, and it grew and grew and grew and grew. So, you know, that's great. The matchmaking was extraordinary for him, you know.
Well, Whitaker was a guy, and you know, you can talk to Kathy Duva, whose husband, you know, she was married to Dan Duva at the time he ran main events before he passed. Kathy had been running the company since his death in you know, like 1999 or 98. But the point is, she's known Pernell Whitaker for decades, and she'll tell the story that Dan Duva would go to Pernell and say, you know, look, you know, you've done this, you've done that, we've had some tough fights, you know, we'll take this fight, you know, against this opponent, we can do this fight in your hometown, we can make a lot of money, it's not that big of a deal. Whitaker used to yell at Dan Duva, I don't want the easy fight, I want the toughest guy you can find, bring me a real guy, bring me a top contender, bring me another champion. He was adamant. This is not for public, this was not for show, this was behind closed doors when they were, you know, discussing what he would do next, you know, what type of opponents and what type of events they wanted to plan. Pernell Whitaker insisted on fighting the top guys, and if you look at his record, it's proven out. I mean, he fought, you know, so many top quality opponents in various weight classes for years, all kinds of top guys.
Well, finally, on that, you know, rest in peace, Pernell Whitaker, on this sad anniversary of his passing, and it's lovely to remember him. Final question tonight, Dan, and let's make this short because I'm going to be asleep quite soon. I don't want to fall asleep on you on a show. I have done that. Jerry Eisenberg, one of our older colleagues, one of our mentors, does often tell the story about how I was interviewing him one night. It's very late. It's about 2 a.m. in the UK, and he lives in Vegas. And Jerry is an amazing character and a brilliant sports writer. And this is true. He was telling me about the Thriller in Manila, his recollections of it one night. I was doing a huge piece for the Ring magazine, and I actually fell asleep because I was sitting in bed interviewing him, and I was really knackered. It was 2 a.m. And he always tells his story whenever at dinner. He'll tell anyone who will listen. Can you believe this guy fell asleep while he was interviewing me on the phone?
I hope he wasn't insulted.
So suddenly he said I was snoring on the end of the phone, you know. And
well, if you fall asleep during one of our chats, think about all the clicks we'll get.
Hang on a minute.
Yeah, exactly.
So final question tonight.
Final question. All right.
And it came up today.
I'm ready.
Okay, it came up today. Because we could talk about this for an hour, this question. And I want to know what you all think. On our next show, we're going to do questions and answers. And I want to know what you all think, and I want you to pose questions around this. Larry Holmes did an interview in the last 24 hours saying that Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua would not been able to live with the heavyweights of his era. Discuss.
Larry Holmes is an all-time great heavyweight champion. A good dude. I've met Larry a couple times. A funny guy, a nice guy, a great fighter. I just disagree with that. And most fighters of different eras will talk about their era as being whatever the era that came after them. And that's not unusual. I've talked to many of the older fighters who look at their era and say, well, you know what, that young guy, he's good, but he wouldn't have been able to hang with our guys. And I just think that's ridiculous. I mean, the Larry Holmes era of heavyweight boxing was not exactly the strongest. I mean, Larry had a great title reign. He had 20 title defenses, which is the second most in the history of the division. He reigned for a very long time, like over 7 years, third longest in the history of the weight class behind Joe Louis and Vladimir Klitschko. So Larry has got a lot of accomplishment, obviously. He fought some good opponents also. But he didn't have to fight a guy 6'9" in front of him. You know, he didn't have to fight a guy like an Anthony Joshua, rock solid the way that he can fire those right hands. Larry Holmes should not detract from the talent level Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury possess. They're both top heavyweights of their era, which is shaping up to be a pretty good one so far, if you ask me. And Larry, not to say that he had easy fights, he fought some good opponents, but to say they wouldn't live with him, again, I'm not saying they would necessarily beat him or that they would beat all the top guys of his time, but to suggest a guy with the talent level of a Tyson Fury or an Anthony Joshua wouldn't be at the worst top level contenders of his time, I just have to disagree. That's all.
I think Larry would have beaten Joshua with his jab, and I think it would have been an amazing jabbing contest between Fury and Holmes. And I'm not going to say that either of those wins, but I think they would have been great contests. Dan?
Yeah, I'm not sitting here suggesting and saying that I'm predicting that head-to-head that Larry doesn't beat both of them necessarily. But the point the quote that you said or read was that they wouldn't even be able to hang in that weight class back at that time.
That's taking it literally. What he means is they weren't as good as the heavyweights of his day. And I agree with you. Those comparisons, they're much bigger men than him for a start, much bigger men. Mm-hmm. And they are, because the Klitschko's began the era of the Lennox Lewis began the era, and Riddick Bowe and those guys began the era of the super heavyweights. And now they're even bigger with the Klitschko's mm-hmm. and these guys we've got now. I agree with you, because it would have been a different sized man for a start as well, you know.
The main thing, though, is that Larry was the best of his time, proven with that long reign. And the current era, we haven't yet finished it yet, because Joshua and Fury are still in their primes, and you could throw, a Dillian White and Deontay Wilder.
They're still getting better, aren't they, frankly?
I don't know about they're still getting better, but they're still clarifying the situation. There's still some fights that are going to take place between those guys. We have, like, I always remember, for example, being and covering Lewis Tyson. And I remember sitting at the post-fight press conference after that fight was over. Now, I know that Lennox went on and still had the fight with Klitschko after that, and Tyson had had a few more fights after that. But in my mind, I'm sitting there at the press conference, and I'm thinking to myself, you know what? We just saw the finale of this era of boxing.
Yeah.
That was the end of the Tyson, Lewis, Holyfield, Bo, Foreman, Second Coming, Tommy Morris, Michael Moore, Ray Mercer, that really outstanding group of heavyweights from the 90s. It just so happened that it ended in like whatever that was, 2001, 2002. And I remember that was the definitive end of that era. And we haven't gotten there yet. But there will come a time, you know, in the next several years where we'll be seeing a Wilder or a Joshua or a Fury having some big fight when they're now older fighters in their late 30s maybe or whatever. And it comes to your mind, we're like, you know what? All these guys have had their fights play out with each other, and that's probably going to signal the end of the era. And we'll see who's standing at the end, and then we can maybe make a better determination comparing those whoever's standing at the end of that era to how maybe they would have performed against in the Holmes era or the Ali era and so forth.
Well, listen, the torch is always passed on, and we know that because the older you get, the more times you see it, of course, and then you get to enjoy the guys after they're gone. Dan, we're going to talk about that a bit more. There's a lot more layers. There's a lot more nuance to talk about when we get our questions in, because people will, I'm sure, will have lots of comments about that as well. It's great to see you as always. Go and have your dinner.
I want you to wear the hat the next time also, by the way.
You like the hat?
I like the hat.
Well, as Uncle Bill would say, our friend Bill Kaplan, who counts the amount of times I brush my hair and you move your glasses, there hasn't been a lot of hair action tonight because I'm wearing a hat.
That's
but
true.
We'll see.
He'll love it.
Listen, always great to see you.
Great to see you also, Gareth.
See you on show 19.
I'll look forward to show 19 and our questions and answers. All right, brother.
Cheers. See you later.
Take care.